What's up guys, my name is Josh and welcome to another comparison video between the K7XX and the 6XX from Massdrop in collaboration with their respective companies, AKG and Sennheiser. Alright, two quick things before we get into this video. One, this HD6XX is mine. I bought this from a person who is not affiliated with Massdrop in any particular way whatsoever. The K7XX, on the other hand, was sent to me by Massdrop for a review. They are not paying, asking, or otherwise trying to influence me to say anything good or bad about these headphones. They did not ask for a comparison. I am doing this under my own volition. All thoughts and opinions are my own. And then the second thing is that I have reviews of both of these items individually. Links are in the description down below. And in this comparison video, when I talk about these headphones, if I say the treble is higher on this headphone or the bass is higher on this headphone, it's in comparison to the other headphone, not as the headphone itself. That information is in the full review. Again, links down below. All right, I've had a few cups of coffee today, so I'm a little wired, so this should be a lot of fun. So what are the basic differences between these two regarding sound? Because these are two dynamic driver headphones that approach sound in what I consider to be completely different manners. With the 6, what you get is kind of a mid-range focused headphone. It's got a little bit of reduced treble and a little bit of reduced bass response, and you get this very great, very tight sound that seems to be more mid-range focused than anything else. So this headphone is incredibly tight, incredibly what people call intimate. You could almost describe the sound as sounding as if you were the microphone that was recording the audio. That's kind of what sounds come across as. They're very, very close. And it is also exceptional, if not one of the best, for vocals, especially for $200. It probably is the best, in my opinion. Now, like I said, the polar opposite of that is that the K7XX here is wide. It's very, very wide. It's not the widest out there, but it is fairly wide in terms of soundstage. And rather than feeling like you are the microphone, you kind of feel like you are almost kind of in the room. You get a little bit more of an in the room feeling with this headphone than you do with the 6. Now, that may be appealing to you or it may not be appealing to you. And a big thing that differentiates these two headphones is going to be the intensity of the sound. The 6 is going to come across a lot more intense and a lot more focused than the 7 is, whereas the 7 is going to seem a little bit more laid back, a little bit more easygoing. So I'm going to jump into the specifics of sound so I can isolate where each headphone does things a little bit better or maybe a little bit worse. Starting with the bass. Now, the bass response on the 7 is actually quite a bit more, especially when you get like kind of below the 100 hertz area, although the bass response on this does have a slight problem compared to the 6. The 6 has what people deem as very neutral, very even, very not necessarily relaxed is the right term, but it's not a very bassy headphone, especially when you get into the sub-bass areas below like 70 to 80 hertz. It doesn't have a whole lot there. That does tend to depend on amplification a little bit more than other headphones necessarily do usually, but comparatively, it doesn't quite stack up in terms of amount compared to the K7XX. However, the problem with the K7XX is that there is a slight bloominess problem that the 6 does not have. And that bloominess happens between 80 to 120 hertz on this headphone. And it doesn't sound particularly boomy, because there's like a very boomy sound that certain bassy headphones can get. And this isn't really a bassy headphone, but just for sake of example, it doesn't get ever boomy, but it does seem to bloom out a little bit into kind of the lower mid-range area. And I would have liked to see that 80 to 100 hertz area tightened up a little bit more on this headphone. And when you compare it to the cleanliness of the 6, you kind of have a choice. Do you want a larger amount of bass or do you want cleaner bass? Now, here's the other thing regarding bass is going to be that intensity factor, and that's going to keep reoccurring here. The bass response on this is more in terms of amount, but it seems like it's coming from further away. It feels, in my opinion, a bit more natural when you're talking about acoustic instruments, because bass guitar does not surround you when you're listening to it. It doesn't have this incredible like rumbling bass response when you're listening to it in a room. And because of the intensity and the intimacy of the sound on the 6, bass guitar and things of that nature tend to sound a little bit more surrounding and a little bit less natural, and they sound a little bit more natural on the K7XX. So now where do these headphones really start to differentiate the most, in my opinion, other than maybe the soundstage? I guess that would be the most different thing about these, but the mid-range. The mid-range is going to be kind of, I mean, obviously, in my opinion, it's going to go to the 6. Now, the problem with the 7, and it's not necessarily a problem, it's just a differing of preference, but my issue with the 7 is that the 7, because of how far away it sounds, the instruments and the vocals in that range seem to really lack an intensity and a focus. And they seem, especially for vocals, seem a little bit farther away than I would particularly like. I like a good separation between background instruments and vocalists, and sometimes, especially with some of the high notes, like I said in my full review, I'm getting kind of a interruption of the vocals with high notes, especially something like drums or cymbals or really higher notes in violin or strings. Those can be particularly intense and overpower the mid-range a little bit. And that's because the mid-range in here comparatively lacks a little bit of focus. Now, you may like that further away sound. I know many people who do prefer that further away, more natural sound. But for my preference, I prefer the 6. Now, in my opinion, the 6 is a well-oiled vocal machine. It is some of the best vocals to this day. It's almost a 20-year-old, actually, I think it's over 20 years old. It's a 20-year-old design regarding the actual driver itself, and I love it even till this day, and that's why I bought a pair. It's just because it does vocal intensity, vocal separation, vocal clarity, vocal tonality just better than most other headphones, the 7 included. Now, this can have a flip side to it. The 6 does have a great ability to separate the singer from the background instruments. And when you're talking about a full band who, when you're talking about like an artist like Adele, or Sam Smith, or any artist that is singularly basically a vocalist and everybody else in the band doesn't really matter as much to whatever that artist's kind of name is. If it's Adele or Sam Smith, obviously it's about Adele or Sam Smith. So when you're listening to artists like that, they design the music to where the vocals really come forward and the band kind of takes a step back and is really more of background music. But on the flip side of that, you have bands that play as bands, and they have kind of an equal importance through all the members in the band. This could go for Metallica, Avenged Sevenfold. I mean, there's a myriad of bands that play as bands. And if you like to hear the entire band a little bit more clear and have less separation between the vocalists and the background instruments, that's where the K7X kind of takes a little bit of a step ahead. Is it feels more like you were listening to an entire band in a wide kind of soundstage way, and that tends to have less focus for vocals, but more focus for the rest of the instruments, and that may be something you're into. Now, the treble for me is going to go to the 6. It's more resolving, and it doesn't have quite the same peak issues that I found on the K7XX. The 7XX has kind of an issue between 7 to 10K where it kind of pops up and it plateaus. I'll put up a frequency response graph here. Now, that is deceptively large because if you look at that entire graph here, there's a big portion of that that's just 0 hertz to 1,000 hertz. And so you're taking 7,000 to 10,000 hertz, which is 3 times that amount of range. And that range really seems to kick up in brightness and loudness when it comes to drums. So anything with drums can seem very, very intense with this. And there's an additional factor to the treble where I think that the K7XX actually makes a much greater gaming headphone than the 6XX. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I mean, even compared to other headphones, the K7XX is one of the best gaming headphones out there, in my opinion. But regarding the technicality of the treble, I think that the 6 has better treble. I think it has better and cleaner and more clear resolution in terms of the extension of the treble. I think it goes higher with more detail. So that's all fine and dandy, but where do these really differentiate? Well, like I said before, they differentiate mostly in the imaging and the soundstage. I would say that the 6 has tighter imaging. I would say that the 7 is about 95% of the total imaging tightness of the 6, but the soundstage capability is much greater on the 7 than it is the 6. And like I talked about in the full review, the 7, when you're playing like a game, especially for gaming, I can always tell the direction of people on both headphones. Directionality is very, very easy. But what the 6 seems to lack in terms of directionality is the depth of the person who's like coming at you. Let's say you're playing a first person shooter, for example. And I could say, okay, they're coming from approximately 230. But I have a very hard time separating whether they're 5 feet away, 10 feet away, or 15 feet away. Whereas the 7 is very, very obvious because of that soundstage how far away they are. So I can know exactly the moment that they're coming around the corner, exactly when I need to pounce on them. And that can be incredibly valuable for gaming. Now, I know not everybody cares about gaming, but this does go kind of hand in hand with music, especially when you're talking about live performances. Live performances, in my opinion, actually sound a little bit better on the K7XX. Now, when you're talking about highly mastered, very well-produced music, I think most of the time I actually prefer the 6XX for its intensity and its focus. And if I wanted to listen to a natural soundstage, I would actually pick speakers. But if you like a more natural, or at least as natural as it can be, type of headphone, then the K7XX is going to be the way to go. It's significantly, and I mean significantly, wider than the 6XX is. And if you're not a person who likes the intensity of the 6, because I know there are a few of you out there, the 7 might be the way to go if you're going to look at Massdrop's offerings. Okay, so if you're interested in either of these, what do you need to know about them? Well, they're both a plastic build. They both will probably last for a long time. They're a high quality plastic. The 6s, I know for a fact, last for years. The 7s I've never owned for years, but I know not too many people complain about the quality control that they have with them. So what do you need to power each of these headphones? Well, the 6 definitely requires a little bit more power. It's a 300 ohm headphone and it has a sensitivity level of 103 decibels. And the 7 is a 62 ohm headphone with a sensitivity level of 105 decibels. And just so everyone's on the same page, the higher the impedance level, the harder it is to drive, and the lower the sensitivity level, the harder it is to drive to the same listening volume output. Both headphones, I would list AA amplifier as recommended. I would almost lean towards the required side for the 6. I don't think it's required for the 7, but it is, again, recommended. All right, guys, as I said, these are polar opposite headphones, and depending on which sound signature you like, you may want to lean towards getting one or the other, just depending on what kind of music you listen to, what kind of sound signature that you like, not necessarily in terms of frequency response, but also in terms of the delivery and being intimate or far away. So I'll leave that decision up to you. I can't make that one for you. If you want to know my personal preference, there's a reason I own the 6s. They're just a classic sound. I love the sound of these, but my preference is not going to be for everybody. So I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. Click that subscribe button if you're new to the channel and you like this type of video and you want to see more headphone reviews. I've got a ton of them, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.